episode number 15 of the Fired Coaches podcast. We are happy to be joined by Coach Matt Doherty tonight. Coach Doherty, appreciate you taking the time to sit down.
Yeah, I'm on the Fired Coaches podcast like that. I don't know how to take it, but like you reached out and I accepted. I think it's kind of appropriate because most coaches get fired. I was being sarcastic, but I remember Marcus, when I lost my job at North Carolina, I was going around the country looking at NBA programs, college programs, and Del Harris, who was the coach, he coached in the NBA for a long time, the Lakers, the Rockets. I don't know if he's with the Bucks, but ironically, his son and I are good friends. His son was the GM of the Bucks for a while, and I went to see the Mavericks practice, and I walk into their offices, and there's Del Harris, and I never met him before. And he said, hello, and he said, congratulations, you're officially a coach, you've been fired. And, that actually was kind of, I think, needed to hear. I think it's we take it sometimes as such a blow, but it's very common in our business. And so I think that coaches need to hear that it's okay. And it's not necessarily a reflection on you as a person or a coach. Sometimes just timing. Sometimes it's very political. And that you need to look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow. I run a Doherty coaching practice, and I work with executives, namely, but my motto is learn and grow. And Nelson Mandela says that he never loses; he either wins or learns. And coaching is an unforgiving business. It's my drug. It's our drug. And we want to do it desperately, but it's so fragile that most people lose their jobs at some point. And you just have to, stay with it. But you definitely have to learn from it. So I probably gave you pretty much the whole podcast right there, Marcus. So, are we done?
That's a good trailer. I wish you'd have been around 6 months ago. We could have just used that. I appreciate all those words, and really that's kind of why this all started. Like you said, sometimes it's timing, it's political, there's a variety of different things, and that's where this all kind of really formulated. So again, I appreciate you joining. Obviously, your background as a player, as a coach, well documented. You were a national champion in North Carolina as a player. You go on after being drafted by the Cavaliers. You worked on Wall Street. You get into coaching with Coach Bob McKillop at Davidson, who you happen to actually play in high school for. You go work at Kansas for Roy Williams for 7 seasons, obviously have a ton of success there. You get your first head coaching job in college at Notre Dame. You're there a season. You go back to your alma mater for 3 years at North Carolina. After that, you're at Florida Atlantic. You're at SMU. You're a scout with the Pacers. You're an associate commissioner in the Atlantic 10. I mean, you just have so many different things. And I think, again, what I'm most excited about is this book that you have coming out, Rebound, From Pain to Passion, which I'll put in the show notes here and link it to the Amazon for pre-ordering right now. And I think, again, we'll touch on some of these things that'll be in that book, but I think that's, again, just kind of a perfect tie-in to this whole podcast and everything, and just kind of more of a reflection of, coach's career like yours.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a range of experiences, and either I can't keep a job, or I like change. All the experiences build upon each other. And I think that if you do have a growth mindset, you will pick up things from each stop along the way and from each experience, good and bad, that'll make you better. We always want our players to get better in the off season and during the season. And we as coaches need to get better in the off season and during the season. And whether that's spending time at clinics or talking to other coaches or reading or watching film, we need to get better. And, it's the book I wrote because it was a tragic breakup for me, a very emotional breakup, because it was my alma mater, because it's my wife's home state. They recruited me to take the job. I was perfectly happy at Notre Dame. I was there 1 year. I'm an Irish Catholic kid from New York. It was a great fit. It was a place where I could put my stamp on it. And then I was recruited to go back to North Carolina after Roy Williams turned it down. And I couldn't say no to Michael Jordan. I couldn't say no to Dean Smith. And I didn't want actually a guy from with Milwaukee roots. You know, the word was if I didn't take the job, they'd hire Rick Majerus. And I didn't think that would be a good fit for my alma mater. So I took the job. And then my first year, I'm National Coach of the Year. And we win a tie for the regular season championship, ranked second seed in the NCAA tournament. We beat Duke at Duke. And 2 years later, I'm forced to resign. You know, what goes on? Roy Williams says it's you point a finger at somebody else, you have three pointing back at you. And so I felt that it was easy to cast blame. But okay, what part did I have in it? And that's where I wanted to use as my foundation for growth. But it was tremendously hard, Marcus. My safety net was North Carolina, was the Carolina family. And then I felt like they turned their back on me, and now I'm falling off the Empire State Building with no safety net. So it was very, very depressing. I dealt with depression. I tried to put up a tough front. And it took me a good 6 years before I finally got to sit down with Coach Williams and talk to him about it. Coach Smith wasn't in good health at that point, so he wasn't able to sit in with us. To have that conversation with Coach Williams, just to really let him know how I felt, not really looking for anything other than an ear. And he was great. He listened. And walking out of there, I felt like there was 600 pounds lifted off my shoulders.
I have a ton of questions. And again, we'll kind of jump around here a little bit, but since you're talking about that, I mean, do you feel writing the book, talking about sitting down with Coach Williams and just kind of venting, him hearing you out? I mean, I feel like that's such an underrated piece that as coaches, when there's things that happen like that, you get fired, you're forced to resign, whatever it is, we don't talk about those things.
Right.
Right. We just kind of keep it in, and you just kind of move on. Right. But really, you don't move on unless you are able to do that. Correct?
Well, there's definitely different stages of grief, and it's like a death, right? So, you have anger, you have whatever, the different stages. And if you anger turned inward leads to depression, okay? So you've got to let it out, whether it be a friend or to the people that let you go. But it's all in how the separation is done, right? Because you do understand as you get older in coaching, more experience, that, it's like divorce, right? 50% of marriages end in divorce. Well, 50%, probably more, end in divorce. So I think it's all about respect with your athletic director and the president. And everything can be done in a respectful manner, even the divorce. And if it's done in a respectful manner, you get your buyout, and they don't try to, jerk you around. They say good things. I say good things. You move on. Well, North Carolina is my alma mater, but the press conference when they released me, nice things weren't said. My leadership was questioned. So now there was damage to my reputation, and it made it harder for me to get a quality job in the coming years. So I had to settle on a low major job as my, next opportunity, where, you lose your job at North Carolina, people should be getting mid-major jobs at worst. And and they didn't pay me what I felt I deserved. So, it was adding insult to injury. Be one thing and said, hey, we'll say good things, you say good things, we'll pay you the remainder of your contract. And heck, if you want to stay on the athletic department, we'll give you a fundraising job. There was none of that. And I played there. I helped Coach Smith win his first championship. So when I lost my job, I remember working with an executive coach, Marcus, and I tried to put my big boy panties on and say, this happens a lot in the business world. And she stopped me. She says, you don't understand. She said, you trusted these men when you were 17 years old, to commit for Dean Smith and Roy Williams. And then this happens to you. And it's like a father turning his back on you. So that helped me understand the pain and respect the pain. So I think it's all about how the breakup is done. And then trying to learn from it, to get better from it. What do we do as coaches, Marcus, when you lose a game? What do you do?
Look inward, frustrated, look for reasons why. I mean, whether it's players, coaches, adjustments, scouting report not on cue, right? I mean, there's so many different things you think through.
But what do you watch?
Game film.
Game film. You take notes and you plan the next practice to improve on the things that need improvement. Well, when we lose a job, we should watch the film and see where we made mistakes and how can we get better. Now, how do you do that? Well, you need some truth tellers in your life. I talk about truth tellers in the book. Who can they be? They can be maybe the AD, the associate AD, a booster, somebody you got close to. I went as far as having 360-degree surveys done with my staff, including secretarial staff at North Carolina, where I gave them surveys and had them fill them out, and they were sent to an executive coach I was working with. He processed them, so they remained confidential, the comments. Then I got to read the comments.
And how long ago was that after you were let go there?
That was that summer. So that was summer 2003.
Okay.
So I'm reading the truth in black and white. Some of the things were nice. Some of the things were hard. I'm like, wow. And when I talk in my book, Rebound from Pain to Passion, I talk about the 6 no's of leadership. And ironically, I make up this kid whose name is Stevitt. And Stevitt was a high school player in Wisconsin. Because I Googled Stevitt, and the only place I found a Stevitt was in Wisconsin. So we need stories, we need anecdotes to stick, right? So Stevitt is an acronym for self, team, environment, vision, industry, and truth. And the 2 most important no's are you got to know yourself and you got to mind for the truth. And I think and they go hand in hand, right? Because to know yourself, you got to ask somebody the truth. Like, hey, was I really a jerk in that meeting? Hey, was I too hard on that player? Hey, did I screw up by calling a timeout with a minute to go? We need to ask and welcome the truth, because so many leaders don't. And so people are afraid. Someone gave me a quote today. I loved it. I collect quotes, by the way, and I'm at Doherty Matt on Twitter. Here's the quote. The higher you get, the less truth you get. The higher you get, the less truth you get. Because people are afraid to give the boss the truth. They're afraid they might get demoted. They might look unfavorably at that person who speaks up. And the higher you get, people feel like they have more of an ego. They feel like they're smarter, that they know everything. They're the smartest person in the room. The best leaders are the one who ask for input and applaud the truth.
You're talking about your 360 survey, and I find that, you doing it right after you get let go, I think says a lot about your character, because in such a tough time, most people are right past it, right? It's not my fault. I'm going to go get the next job and not really learn from what happened, right or wrong. And
Right.
I mean, what would you say in terms of kind of branching off of that? You're talking about, truth tellers and coaches and people on top and not want to tell them the truth. I mean, do you think, and this is a broad statement, but coaches that struggle in any profession, basketball, business, whatever it is, football, track and field, is it that the people underneath them that are on their staffs are afraid to tell them and really just want to kind of go with what they say? Or, I mean, is there other things you think that lead to kind of failure, within those teams?
Oh, there's a lot of things that lead to failure. I mean, incompetence, lack of feel of the game. There's some coaches that get head coaching positions and don't have good feel of the game. They're just not good. They may have gotten a job because they were a good recruiter, or they came from the right program. They get the job and they just don't have a feel of managing a game. There could be people that hire a bad staff. So they don't have a good staff around them. There's so many reasons you get fired: injury, scheduling, academics, a bad kid, bad infrastructure, tons of reasons. But I do know this: it is very common that leaders don't mind for the truth, and they need to. Because I say this, if you don't manage the truth will manage you right out the door.
How did, going back to the Carolina thing and you talking about things didn't end very well in terms of they kind of threw you under the bus, leads to you having a tough time finding a job that maybe fits you the best. How did that hurt that North Carolina family? Being a player there, you're talking about all those guys you were connected with over the years. I mean, how did that affect relationships, good or bad?
Yeah, no, it's real. I mean, there's probably over 200, 250 former players now. And I felt like the black sheep of the family for a long time. I tried to stay out in front. My wife stole a quote from somebody that said, when you get run out of town, get out front and make it look like a parade. And, don't hide. I think that as a coach, when you get fired, do not hide. Be present. Because if you're not, there's a vacuum and it's going to be filled. You want to control the narrative. Like, I look back, I should have gone to the press conference because I would have been able to control the narrative a little bit. They wouldn't have said as many negative things if I was present. So be present. Show that you're okay. And it is okay. It's not life ending. We feel sometimes like we have leprosy. No, we just lost a coaching job. It happens all the time. Kevin White, who was the AD at Duke, he was my AD at Notre Dame. When I lost my job, he was one of the first people to call me. He said, take the high road. There's less traffic up there. So that's what I try to do. And just learn from it and admit your mistakes. Say, hey, I could have done better. I wish I would have done better here, here, here. Don't blame anybody else, especially not publicly. Take accountability. Take the high road. Other people are watching, other potential employers. And oh, by the way, heck, how many Hall of Fame coaches have gotten fired? How many great coaches? I look at Joe Torre's one of my favorite managers of all time. Bill Belichick got fired. Heck, Tom Landry got fired. You know, go down the line. There's so many good coaches who have gotten fired that it's not really a reflection on you as a person. It could just be bad timing. Could be just bad luck. So, learn from it.
When Notre Dame came about, kind of stepping back a little bit, you kind of touched on briefly about, I asked you that question on why coaching staffs fail, why teams fail. You obviously gave a lot of different answers and reasons for why, but you talked about never calling a timeout before. And you obviously went from Davidson to Kansas as an assistant, and you take that Notre Dame job for a year. I mean, you guys went to the finals of the NIT, if I'm not mistaken, that year. What set you up that you feel like you were able to run that program and obviously have some good amount of success where you guys got hot towards the end of the year and had a lot, kind of coming back and things like that? I know you had Troy Murphy and a few other guys there too, but what kind of think you set you up for good success there that 1 year?
Well, I think a couple things. You mentioned it. Having Troy Murphy helped. He was an All-American. He was the Player of the Year in the conference. I think having a great foundation and a system, having played at North Carolina, having worked for Roy Williams for 7 years, I knew that system and it fit us at Notre Dame. So I said, when I was interviewing, I said, I have the blueprints to the North Carolina system and I can place them right here at Notre Dame. And that's what I did. And then you start to tweak things accordingly to personnel, to, I started playing more zone. I was always confident in my ability to understand the game. As an assistant, as a player, I was always that coach on the floor. So I felt confident with my understanding of the game, and it's when you take over. For me, it's more about managing up to your athletic director, managing up to the school president, managing up to the dean of admissions. Those are the things that are the bigger challenge, I think, for a lot of coaches. Unless you come from a system where all you were was a recruiter. Coach Williams always prepared us because he gave us responsibilities throughout the program. Scouting, things like that. So I felt prepared from a basketball standpoint. It's the other stuff, the politics of the job, that is always new and different in each university. Where are the landmines? I talk about that all the time. Where are the landmines? As an assistant coach, or if it's just about basketball, you don't have to worry about those things. It's the other stuff that can get you.
Do you think, kind of being a like-minded school, maybe you were touching on that a little bit earlier about Notre Dame and North Carolina and having some similarities, I think, as an educational institution, were you able to kind of find those landmines quicker at Notre Dame, being there that you were there that year, or are you kind of just kind of going with the flow throughout that year and kind of figuring things out?
I was probably going with the flow, but I had good alignment with Bubba Cunningham, who was the associate AD, now the AD at North Carolina. He was great. His office was right next to mine. We were good friends, so he could, be upfield and tell me where the landmines were.
Kind of like your lead blocker then.
Yeah, and on top of that, there weren't as many landmines. It was almost like a blank canvas, where North Carolina, that that canvas was painted on and it was baked on. It was hard to make any adjustments. And there were more landmines because, there was more interest, there was more tradition, but yet there were still some fundamental things that needed to be addressed needed to be addressed at Notre Dame. Some similar things, some things that I felt needed to be addressed is just how you address them and when you address them is the key.
So you kind of touched on earlier in the episode about, leaving Notre Dame after that year and, not being the first choice and rumors of Rick Majerus possibly taking that job, being outside the Carolina family. I mean, what was that moment like? I mean, going back to your playing days and you're playing for Coach Smith, you win a national title. You guys have a great success. I don't think you ever won 28 games was the least amount of games you won in the season in those 4 years, which is unbelievable. But I mean, looking back to your playing career, did you ever think someday I could be the head coach at this place?
No, I never even thought about coaching. I never thought about coaching till 1989 when I moved from New York to Charlotte, and I started coaching an 8th grade team. And I'm like, wow, like I never wanted to coach. I don't know why I didn't want to coach, but I never wanted to coach. And then all of a sudden I started coaching this 8th grade team and I got bit by the bug badly.
So then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so that opportunity comes up then. And I guess what was that, not to keep laboring on the UNC situation, but what was that whole process like of your like Notre Dame, you're there, I think it was a year and 4 months, year and 7 months, somewhere in between there. And you have this opportunity where you feel like, hey, like now I have a chance, right? In terms of being in the family and things like that. I mean, what was, I guess, just going through your mind? I mean, it had to be running 100 miles an hour about what to do.
Well, I never thought I'd be the coach at North Carolina. I thought that Roy Williams was going to take the job. And then when I called Coach Smith, this was in mid-June, when Coach Guthridge retired, I was calling him to ask him advice about Kansas, if Kansas were to call me, because I was there 7 years. And he played at Kansas. So he said, well, it's not a done deal here with Roy yet. You're on the short list. And I said, oh, that's a no-brainer. Like, that's not going to happen. And then 2 weeks later, I'm in his office and he says, can you take the job? And I say, I don't know. I got to talk to my wife. And he said, 2 weeks ago, you said it was a no-brainer. So I get on the plane, private plane, going back to South Bend with my wife. And I said, I could be the head coach at North Carolina or the head coach at Notre Dame. Like, having great options is a burden sometimes. And that was a burden. And so I weighed back and forth. I'd go back and forth. And 1 minute I think I'm staying at Notre Dame. 1 minute I think I'm going to North Carolina. And then Michael Jordan calls. And Coach Smith knew what button to have him push. And that's when he said, if you don't take the job, Coach might go outside the family and hire Rick Majerus. And I'm like, oh, I guess we're going to Chapel Hill.
Well, I can imagine prior to that call from Michael Jordan, you're in a unique situation where obviously it's your alma mater, but I would say, from being from the outside, two of your bigger mentors and Dean Smith and Roy Williams are somehow involved with the job. So getting an outside source who has an idea, right? You're kind of like, who do I go to for help here?
That's great insight, Marcus, because I would always confer with them on other jobs, but now they were emotionally involved in the job. And I met with Coach Williams in Indianapolis at the Nike camp, and he probably felt bad that he was turning the job down and saying no to Coach Smith. And then Coach Smith wanted me to have the job. So you're right. Where was I going to get solid counsel, a truth teller that was not biased? I couldn't. I couldn't. Maybe Bob McKillop but at the end of the day, I didn't want to be afraid of the opportunity. I didn't want to look back. I was never wired that way. I took on the challenge to go play at North Carolina. I could have played at a lesser program and guaranteed more playing time, but I didn't want that. I didn't want to look back and be sitting in South Bend and seeing North Carolina cut down the nets, thinking that could have been me. You think of the worst thing that could happen. Well, it was worse than that, right? But you think, I'll lose my job and maybe I'll get paid well and I could find another job somewhere else or do TV. But it ended up being worse than that. But that's where your faith comes in. And I think one of the good things that came out of this was I like to think I'm, leaned on God more, got closer to God, because you don't know why things happen. And we won't know probably until we find our place in heaven and he tells us, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it now.
But it's true though. I mean, right in that moment though, you don't know what's a bigger regret, watching, say, Rick Majerus take North Carolina to a championship or taking the job and struggling, right? You don't know in that moment because you're not in that seat yet.
No. So I wasn't going to pass that. I wasn't going to let that go because I was afraid of it. And so, I got fired and humiliated. And maybe that was God's way of saying, it's too much, too fast, and needed to get humbled. And, who knows? You don't know. You don't know. You just have to have faith that, we make plans and God laughs. So
one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah. So, hey, God, what do you want me to do now? Well, people say they have signs and I'm looking out the window. You just kind of, I do think he shuts doors and opens others. Another one of my favorite saying is trust a closed door. So I've tried to get head coaching jobs and have not gotten them. And I remember trying to get a mid-major job a couple of years ago, and the AD texted me one morning and said, they're going in a different direction. I wheeled around on my knees and thanked God for closing that door. That's faith. I'm like, okay, what I don't know what you have in store, but I'm going to move down this road now, and there'll be some options. And so, I do this coaching. I do executive coaching. I work with this company called Vistage, the oldest and largest, started in Wisconsin, oldest and largest executive coaching firm. I wrote a book. I do some radio, do a little TV, and hopefully I can impact lives through, executive coaching.
So you talked about that growth mindset and going back to that 360 survey you do at North Carolina. I mean, how did you basically bounce back, basically a rebound, according to your book, taking that job at FAU and then moving on to SMU and continuing to, obviously growth mindset, as many people should have, lifelong learner, and continuing to just grow. And I listened to the podcast, I think it was Dose of Leadership the other day, and you talked about how in leadership, there's no finish line, which I had never heard that before, but the way you put that was I think the best way to put it. And I know over the years now, last 15 to 20, you've really become that kind of growth mindset person. Just talk about kind of that and how that grew, and even at those stops at FAU and SMU, and just how you kind of continue to grow each day.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, the last 17, 18 years have been very difficult emotionally. I've suffered with depression, and I've just now admit that. I never wanted to admit that before. I am now finally feel whole and fulfilled and at peace. It was 17 years, Marcus. I tried to, in the book, I wrote about the bitter river. I say, you try to get bitter or better. And there's this river and there's this bridge that's has an expensive toll. It's a windy bridge, a lot of wind, no guardrails, and you're driving across this bridge and someone says to you, hey man, you got screwed. Or there's a picture of Roy Williams cutting down the nets, or there's a former player playing in the NBA, or Mike Bray signs an extension. There's all these triggers, and you just want to go right off the road and turn bitter. And you got to fight that. You got to put blinders on and fight those triggers to stay steady and get across that bitter river and take that high road. It's hard. It's very hard, but I feel now after 17, 18 years, I finally feel at peace for the first time, truly. And it's a great feeling. And I never thought, not sure if I ever felt this before, would ever feel this way again. And the book has been therapeutic for me. I think, my goal was to help people learn about leadership, because leadership is the most important topic not formally taught. It's probably more important than math, English, science, history, because without good leadership, any institution is not going to be successful, but it's not formally taught. So when I went on my leadership journey and I'm sitting in this classroom at Wharton and UVA, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I would have taken these classes before I was a head coach, I might still be the head coach. Now, leadership is a skill. You can't just take a class and say, oh yeah, I'm a good leader now. No. It's a skill that needs to be practiced. That's why I call it the Doherty coaching practice. You've got to put yourself in situations that test your leadership. It's kind of like, I tell people, it'd be like going to the driving range, taking a golf lesson, and then all of a sudden, all right, next month I'll see you at Augusta. You're playing in the Masters. Really? Well, you better practice and put yourself in pressure situations, and you'll crack, but you learn from that. You'll make mistakes. That's what I'm talking about. Leadership, there's no finish line, because you've got to constantly put yourself in those situations that'll force you to grow. And I go back to Nelson Mandela's quote, I never lose. I always win. I never lose. I either win or I learn.
Yeah, it's very powerful as well. How did you even go about, and again, this is just because I would say in the last 8 years, I've become a real growth mindset, reading all the time, trying to figure things out. And again, like you just mentioned with leadership, you can't just take a class and say, okay, well, for the rest of my life, I'm a good leader, right? And everything's different situations and who you're managing and time and all that. But I mean, how did you go about putting this book together? And does it focus more on the coaching career, or does it talk about playing career and kind of your early days growing up?
Yeah, I think once I lost my job at North Carolina, I started, people say you should write a book, and I don't want to write a negative book. So I just started to put some things down on my iPad, more to keep track of things that I wanted to have just in case I did write a book, to put down dates and comments and events, the timeline. And then I would do a little bit more, it wasn't anything consistent. And then when I started doing some executive coaching a year ago and talking corporate talks, people asked, hey, do you have a book to leave behind? And I didn't. So that prompted me to explore it a little bit more. And I asked a couple of friends who were truth tellers, and they said, you should write a book. And you know, I didn't want people to think like, who does he think he is writing a book? But a good friend of mine said the other day, he says, you don't have to worry about that. You deserve to write a book with what you went through. And, you know, you see a lot of leadership books, and, you know, some people just write about topics. They've not experienced it. So I wanted to write it from someone who's experienced it. And if one person benefits from this book, then it's been a success. I wanted to put a backstory to it from growing up, why I was wired the way I was wired, and then the lessons I learned so somebody could use it as a reference book and say, okay, I'm getting ready to hire somebody. What did Matt say about that? I'm getting ready to take a new job. What did Matt say about that? I'm getting ready to fire somebody. What did Matt say about that? So I want them to use it as a reference with some stories about playing basketball growing up in North Carolina, and a lot of the lessons I learned.
So this is really, you kind of talked about, since you've been doing kind of the coaching, this book has really come together fairly quickly then.
Yeah, I started really working with a publisher last June. So yeah, it's hard work, man. You know, it's unless you know, some people have ghostwriters. I didn't have a ghostwriter. I did it, and I had a publisher, and I had a PR person, and an editor. So I had a team. You know, it's work, but I like it. You know, I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy talking on the radio. I enjoy doing TV work. I enjoy writing a book, and I think I'll write, you know, another book, and maybe I'll write another book after that.
That's great. Yeah, I look forward to reading that because, again, there's so many great books out there. But again, on how I started this whole podcast was the whole basis of so many books are wrote about people who have won championships after championships and had a ton of success. And obviously, you can drink from those books and get a great deal. But I think these ones are interesting as well because there's not as many out there where people are willing to kind of show their scars and their wounds of what happened and, you know, things they would have done differently or what to look for in the future or whatever. You know, I think you can learn so much more from those. I really do.
Well, that's exactly why I wrote it. Exactly why I wrote it. Right there. You know, I want people show people how vulnerable I am, I was, and the mistakes I made. You know, because like you said, there are a lot of books out there of, you know, winners, and, you know, those are great, but I think that this was my story, and I thought it would be a compelling read.
Well, again, too, I mean, to get to the part where you were, to have the job at North Carolina, you obviously had success along the way, right? As a player, you know, you go work for Coach McKillop, you have a ton of success with Coach Williams at Kansas and Notre Dame and things like that. So again, that's where I think people kind of lose perspective of like, to get in a situation to be let go, you need to have done some things to get in that situation to be there as well.
Right. No, thank you. Yeah.
I guess last question here. You know, if you were to go back and you were to take a head coaching job, based on all you've kind of learned over those last 15 to 20 years, you know, since being let go and the reflection time, the book, all that, what would you do differently if you were to be given the keys tomorrow to a Power Five, a mid-major job, anything like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would go slow with change. I would go very slow. My demeanor would be different.
In what way?
Just slow. I just go slow. I'm a hard charging, intense guy. I would just purposely keep my foot on the brake and not on the gas and just go slow. You know, very calm, go slow, get to know the players, get to know the administration, get to know my staff, put together a great staff, and just go slow. I went fast at North Carolina because I had to. It was July. Most important thing in July is recruiting. I just go slow, and I'd make sure that I had a trusted truth teller around me, either on my staff or an administrator like I had at Notre Dame and Bubba Cunningham, and just go slow. There's a great follow on Twitter, Tim Kite, Kight. And he talks about E plus R equals O, where E is the event, R is your reaction, and O is the outcome. And the only thing you control is your reaction. So just react slow. You can always get mad later. You can always, but sometimes you got to react, right, in the course of a game. But outside of that, you don't. You can always say, let me think about it. Let me think about it. Let me think about it. And I think that if I can condition, I'd condition I'm more conditioned like that now. Just don't let any little thing phase you. Let it go. Pick your battles. Not every battle is worth fighting. Pick your battle. And that's probably what I do. Just go slower.
Do you think being an assistant in many successful programs, a head coach, associate commissioner of a league, do you think in the world we live in, which I think a lot of it's triggered by social media and everything as well, but the expectation of everything in life is got to have it now. It's got to be fast. It's got to be done. We got to win. I mean, do you think that there's just such a mindset of like way too fast? That's not even a reality.
Yeah, no question. 100%. I mean, used to be guaranteed 4 years. Now coaches get fired in 2. You can't build a program, a culture, especially in college basketball, in less than 4 years. It takes time. And so, there are people that are just impatient. Kevin Stallings got fired at Pitt in a year.
And then, like you mentioned before about the contracts and buyouts and that whole deal that went on there as well, right? I mean, that's another layer to kind of the whole thing.
Yeah, well, that's, if you're gonna hire me and fire me in a couple of years, then I should have a buyout that is significant. Now, if you fire me after 7 years, my buyout should be less significant. But it's you better, going back to looking at jobs, I think the thing that you have to try to find, and this is hard to do in the interview process, how is the president of the school and the AD aligned? And then how would you be aligned with them? It's hard to find out in short notice because these jobs open up and then they fill them in less than a week. So how can you find that out? But that alignment is critical. And then are you a fit for that job? Are you a fit for that institution? I don't fit a lot of institutions. I fit Notre Dame and North Carolina. I fit probably more mid-major programs because I do like the academic kid. I like that kid that, we're talking about, hey, trying to play professional basketball, but also, getting a job on Wall Street or, a consulting firm or, some tech company. Like that is fulfilling work for me. Where, I still talk to players at SMU who are, working in corporate America, and that makes me feel good that they are doing those things. Because you want players to use basketball and not have basketball use them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point to finish on. And again, I know you're busy with the book coming out, and appreciate you taking the time to sit down, and know weather's not great out by you and everything like that. So thanks for sitting down and kind of telling a little bit about your story. And again, I'll put in the show notes your Twitter and also the book link on Amazon to pre-order that. Really looking forward to that coming out here soon.
Thank you so much. Yeah. The website for the book is rebound-book.com, and people can see pictures. We got some great endorsements, Marcus, from Dick Vitale, Jay Billis. Michael Jordan wrote the foreword of the book. And, I hope my book is half as good as the endorsements I got.
Well, awesome. Well, good luck with things. And again, I really appreciate taking the time to sit down.
Thank you so much. You're doing a good cause and helping coaches that lose their jobs. It's not the end of the world. You look at some coaches who have lost jobs and bounced back and, are doing great at their second opportunity. And that's, like I say to my players, if that's the worst thing that happens in your life, you'll live a charmed life. So I wish everybody good luck that's listening to your podcast.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. Yeah, and thanks again, and look forward to purchasing that book here soon.
Thank you, Marcus.